Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the World Affairs Council Upstate for this America and the World Conversations event. World Affairs Council Upstate is a part of the nationwide system of organizations dedicated to engaging their communities in foreign policy, international business, and global impact issues. We're a non-political, non-partisan organization, and we strive to bring information to you in the most academic and unbiased manner that we can. This is to allow you to form your own opinions and ask your own questions. If you have questions in today's presentation, please type them into our chat function. They'll be given to our speakers via our moderator, Rob Rowan. If we have time at the end of this presentation, we'll also open the floor for questions directly from you. Today's topic, which was planned before the events of January 6th, is a prime example of why it's important that we provide an academic platform for conversation on global issues. Topics such as who's watching America and what do they see can become emotionally charged and partisan in feel if they're not approached from an inclusive stance where different opinions are allowed to be heard. As we look at headlines from around the world, reaction to the Capitol protest and storming from allies and adversaries alike, the knowledge that America has a unique place in the world really hits home. But one quote from a source in East Africa resounds like the beacon we may all need right now. The United States of America was and still is a visible light, that its people still have faith that it will retain its core principles and why they really haven't given up hope. As a 501c3 nonprofit, the World Affairs Council Upstate depends on you, your membership and donations to fulfill our mission to engage South Carolina and the rest of the world. If you're not a member, please consider joining us. You can go to World Affairs Council Upstate online for more information. To start today's program, I'd like to invite the chair of our World Affairs Council Upstate, Mr. Rob Rowan, to introduce our special guest.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I will say again, if you haven't muted your microphone, please do so at this point. I get to introduce these very qualified speakers. I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. And let me tell you about them. They have covered the globe with their work, which is fitting for this session. I've been asked to give a short of background bio of each of them because they want to include their bio and their information in their talk. So I will make it shorter, but I think I wanted to cover just some of the basics to give them the understanding of what they've done. So Kyle David Anderson is a senior director for the Office of Global Engagement at Clemson University. He comes from Centre College, where he served as the director of Center for Global Citizenship and the head of Asian Studies and Chinese Studies. He's also worked with the U.S. State Department on the U.S.-Serbia Partnership, the Henry Luce and Andrew Mellon Foundations, and he's a former Fulbright Junior Scholar, Taiwan, and Fulbright Hayes Fellow, China and Italy. Kyle has worked in China, Thailand, Taiwan, Myanmar, India, Malaysia, and outside of Asia, he's worked in Italy, Serbia, and South Africa. I'm sure I probably left off something, but welcome, Kyle. And let me then introduce David Esch, who happens to be on the board of World Affairs Council Upstate. He has an incredible background. He began his development career in Ghana, and he went on to work with USAID and USDA in 5 countries in Africa, and he continued his foreign service all over the globe. From Ghana, he has worked for USAID and other organizations in Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Russia, Bulgaria, Guyana, and 4 other countries in Africa, and even Tennessee and Oregon. So currently he works with SCORE, developing small businesses in South Carolina, and continues to develop his development and consulting work with USAID through the Design Thinkers Group, USA. And as was said, I will invite you to use the chat thing, and I will be listening in and seeing what you do. And you may hear me talk and ask the questions at some point, but you may not see me. So the voice from nowhere. But thank you, and let's go on. And I think we're going to start with Kyle. Thank you, Kyle, for coming.
Thank you so much, Tracy, Rob, and everyone who's attended, and for Kim for helping set this up. I've got to be honest, David and I have been talking for quite some time about how we were going to run this talk. And I remember our big meeting happened on January 5th. And we had a great plan, things we were going to talk about. And then January 6th happened. And then Dave and I have had a number of meetings since then, as you can imagine. So we feel honored, but we also feel humbled by this opportunity. I know everyone who is here today cares deeply about the United States and its perception and its work with other nations. And I'm sure everyone here today has had meaningful work and friendships with others outside of our borders. So this is all very important to each of us. So we're humbled by that. We don't, the things we talk about are meant to be taken very objectively. So I know that the things David's going to say about what he hears about in Africa or Europe aren't necessarily his own thoughts. And me, with my background in Asia and China particularly, I'm kind of a China watcher. So the things I say don't necessarily, when I'm talking about Xi Jinping, I'm not talking about Kyle's thoughts. So I want us all to just keep that in mind, that we really are trying to look at what the world is saying about us right now. We believe that that will help us as we move forward as Americans and as global citizens to achieve the goals that we want to. I'm going to begin by just saying this. One of the things that Rob didn't bring up about my past was my earliest memories internationally are being the recipient of fisticuffs diplomacy. When we were living in the Middle East, my father used to work for the Navy and the NSA. And we were living in Abu Dhabi before it became Las Vegas. And I remember being sort of bullied and my lunch money being taken from me on the playgrounds. And, fisticuffs diplomacy, something we continue to see as humans. We don't always treat each other well. And things that are happening in our own country, there's a little bit of the fisticuffs happening, some violence, and we get to decide where we go from here. I remember as a child after that event, I ended up being a little bit of a bully for a while because we act out the way we're treated. But then I had a lot of experiences that made me more compassionate because I just wanted to help people that were in my position. And I remember a particular event that happened when I was leading a group of faculty through China and Tibet. And when I was in Tibet, being led through that country, we were in the capital of Lhasa there, and our guides were Tibetans. And many of you know that ethnically, let's say interethnically, the Han Chinese, the majority Chinese and the Tibetans don't quite get along. And as an American and a white male, when I was speaking Chinese with the military there, I was allowed to do quite a bit. And they treated me quite differently than my Lhasa colleagues. And when that started to happen and I saw that real discrimination happening, I sort of remembered my own experiences. So a great deal of compassion has grown in me since those earliest memories that I've had. David and I decided that we would begin by not only talking about our past, but the things that are most on our mind right now, given recent events. And for me, those two things are intercultural communication and the idea that global means local too. Global just doesn't mean over there. So what I mean by intercultural communication, that there are, anodyne dictionary definitions of this, but it's essentially that we commit to engaging other people that are different from us in respectful ways and empathetically helping them and seeing all of us as humans as part of a global community. And so intercultural communication, in my position at Clemson, for instance, that doesn't just mean intercultural communication, let's say with someone from the UK or from China, but it actually means here, the folks that are different here that are Americans of all types. So cultivating intercultural communication in a world that we've seen in the past few years where it's deteriorated. So that's really on my mind as a global educator. There's a quote that I want to share with you all from J. William Fulbright. I think We're all familiar with that name. I think the spirit of Fulbright needs to blaze even stronger than it ever has right now. And that is that exchange can turn nations into people, contributing as no other form of communication can to the humanizing of international relations. I love this part in his quote here from 1983. Man's capacity for decent behavior seems to vary directly with his perception of others as individual humans, with human motives and feelings, whereas his capacity for barbarism seems related to his perception of an adversary in abstract terms, as the embodiment, that is, of some evil design or ideology. So that spirit of treating us all as humans in need of recognition and respect, as opposed to abstracting people into, let's say, groups or countries and things like that. I think that spirit of J. William Fulbright should really guide us. And then that idea that global is local is really important to me. And that's the idea that we're not, as Americans, immune, we've seen it, immune to the kinds of things that we point out that other countries are doing wrong too. We're exceptional because we're exempt from contributing and making things better, or that we're exempt from global ills and global challenges. We're exceptional because we care, right? We care about what happens in other places, and we care about what happens on our side of our borders too. And so we're all interconnected. So when we say global, we don't mean over there. That's a global problem. We're involved in that. So David, I've been talking for a little bit, but David, I'll let you say a couple words.
Yeah, I really support and agree with where you're going with that, Kyle. My journey really began in development in 1979, shortly after coups in Ghana. And one of my early experiences was I was in the town of Kumasi in Ghana, and I was putting a pipe on the side of my car. And an old man walked by, and I was with my gardener, and the old man said something in the local language tree, and I said, "What did he say?" And my gardener said, "He said that you're an American." And I said, "What did I do that makes me an American?" I didn't talk, I didn't say anything, I just was there. And he says, "Only an American would have taken off his belt to strap the pipe to the side of the car. Nobody else does that in the world." And it really revealed to me that Americans are different at times. And we are a unique group of people that just gets out and does things. And we have been well known for that ability and qualification. And I go with pride that we go out and get some things done. And that doesn't mean we're always right, and doesn't mean we all don't stumble. But over the years, I've really seen that in so many wonderful ways, not just through U.S. Agency for International Development, but my gosh, the missionaries across the world that we have sent out that just, I mean, fabulous, fabulous neighbors and people that get along. As I worked through my career, I was also served in Pakistan, and I served with USAID there as a Foreign Service officer. And because of my poor language skills, I did not tenure with the Foreign Service. But there I learned that Pakistanis very much understood and taught me that in that period, which was the middle 80s or middle 90s period, that they were differentiating between their relationship about our government and the people. And in some of my earlier experiences, people had not always made that differentiation. We saw all kinds of violence in South America against in the 60s and early 70s against America. And we've had threats to diplomats and other people, and burning of effigies and things. And yet as time went on, things began to change. People began to see us differently and began to look at us as, oh, that's your government speaking. We're not against you, we're against what your government is doing. And so I began to see that kind of differentiation on the world scene. And with AID, I traveled in a couple of positions from Morocco to Fiji. and worked on issues of overseas training with people. And I encountered many people in different government positions. And I was once again reminded that, oh, that's your government position. And, you know, we really like you. I just really don't care for that position, kind of thing. And so as the US has worked to educate, train, involve, travel, we've had Boeing and Airbus taking us all over the world. And we have had many, many more people coming to the US people going to other countries. And so we've had this wonderful mixing and wonderful interchanges. And therefore, people have come to know us, meaning America, better. And as many people in other countries have pointed out and said, that the more they got to know the US, the more they saw our problems, the more they saw our foibles, the more they challenged our exceptionalism, as Kyle was just saying. And they were saying that because they had maybe been here, come here firsthand and learned about us. One of the things I learned when I was working in Guyana in South America was that many of the ministers of Guyana live in New York on Long Island. Weekly, they travel from New York to Guyana, do their ministerial work, and leave on Friday around noon to go home. And their children and their wives stay in New York. Okay, that kind of interchange, that kind of transportation, that kind of interactions says that they really know us. And that's true for many other countries. Many people that I know have sent their children here to be educated, to go through colleges and education. And one of the things that the USAID has done over the years is send a lot of people here for PhD and master's degrees so that they could strengthen their own institutions. And they have done that. Worldwide, we are educating more people. More people are at our higher levels of education and reading and awareness than ever before. It has also impacted health indicators, up probably until this last year, but it has changed health, it changed business, it changed commerce, and things have come together in a very different way. So sometimes when we hear, when we read, as we did this last week, the headlines, sometimes it's because they know us quite well. And yes, they can be pretty critical and they can be hurtful and very concerning at times. But that does not mean, in my view, that they don't like us. As when I was in Moscow in the mid-90s, just after the wall fell, we were bringing Russians to the US for 3 weeks of training and exposure. And they came, and a number of times I went to follow-up interviews and follow-up meetings with people who had returned. And they would say, I thought you were taking us to Hollywood. But then I realized that was really, really America. A man who was in water came to 3 different locations in the US. And as he said, the first location in Florida, he thought that they were joking that they only lost or could not account for less than 1% of their water revenue-wise. And in the US, it's amazing if you cannot account for 2%. Well, that man in his city, which was over 500,000 people in Russia, could not account for 60 to 80% of his water, okay? He had no idea where the water was going and could not collect revenue on it. And as he said, by the 3rd city, I knew you weren't joking. And I knew I had a real problem that we had to solve. And I felt that very often before Russians came to the US, they had a vision of they were the world standard and that the rest of the world was underneath them. Well, we kind of gave them the exposure that they were in need of upgrading and doing a lot of infrastructure changes. And I think Russia has done quite a bit of those kinds of things. But it also came to that they began to understand us and we began to understand them. One of the requirements of that time was that the people coming to the US could not go to Washington, DC, because they wanted Americans to meet them, and they wanted the Russians to meet Americans and not meet the people in and around Washington, D.C. So you had much more of an understanding. And I think that that's taken place in so many other ways, Fulbright scholarships including in that, and many, many other programs that we have done around the world. So one of the things is, where do we go from here? What do we do? For me, we are connected with the world, and we should stay connected. We should stay involved. We should try to increase our understanding of each other and listen to each other. One of the things that I have learned is that I have to go and tell the message as to why I've arrived someplace. This goes back to my early Ghana beginnings, where the traveler is coming from afar, and that could be down the street. But the traveler has to say why you have come. And then you tell them what news you're bringing, but you also listen to what the news is from the home front. And so listening is very much a part of what I do. Introduce myself, tell you who I am, and then hush my mouth so that I can hear what you have to say, and I can learn about your point of view. Doesn't mean I agree with you, doesn't mean I'm going to accept it. It just means I do try to listen. And I think that we all need to be listening to each other, engage in conversations, engage in communications, and go from there forward if we can. Kyle, any comments back?
Yeah, I just want to build upon one thing you pointed out, and I think we all should keep that in mind. We are talking about what the rest of the world thinks about America, and if we just narrowed that focus just to January 6th, this would be a very, very depressing, contentious talk. And you can see we're working against that because there are still amazing things that America is contributing to the world. And I want to point it out again, higher ed. One of the projects I've been involved in was starting a university in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. And, you know, people aren't interested or don't think that America has perfect models or perfect products. We ourselves know we're having our own problems with primary education all the way to higher education system in America. However, all of Asia and Southeast Asia are adopting our general education liberal arts models because they actually, like David pointed out, through all of this exchange, they've discovered that the students are coming back as better participants in civil society. They're more well-rounded. They get a broad education. They learn quite a bit, and they become very helpful to their corporations and the government. And in places like Myanmar, where you have 160 different ethnic groups and languages who aren't getting along and haven't gotten along for centuries, this new university I'm talking about called Parami University, what they're trying to model is getting as many of these students from all these groups who have not historically got along into the same classrooms for 4 or 5 years. Because if they can do that there, then they can do it in Parliament later. And that is a great thing that people around the world are seeing and adopting from us. But it's also a lesson back to us. It's a mirror back to us. Is that what's happening in our educational systems, in our homes, so that when our sons and daughters or us enter those halls where decisions are made, that we're actually working together. So
one of my lessons from Indonesia was that I was trying to figure out how to adapt some concept, management concept. And two of the faculty members at a government training institution who had been trained in the US, they were both PhDs, and they said to me, David, don't you try to adapt it. You bring it to us the best you possibly can. We have the responsibility for making it local. It's our country, it's our culture. We can do that. You can't do that. So don't even try. And I've used that as a good lesson, that it's a local person's responsibility to make it theirs and take it on. is not my job. My job is to bring it, present it, and to try to be helpful to them. And in Indonesia, at one point, I sat for 3 weeks, 8 hours a day, looking at the other side of the table, because we were to improve the curriculum. And they told me that, David, you are the technical advisor. And I said, did you get that word, advisor? It's not my job to do it. Your job is to change this curriculum. And we sat there across the table, and my boss, president of the Institute of Public Administration, came and sat there for 3 hours, and she pulled me out of the room and she says, are you crazy? She says, you are just sitting there looking at them. I said, yeah, and occasionally we even read the papers, and then we'll have a conversation. But what happened in that time period was I built up a rapport and a trust level. And then they told me what some of the real problems were within the curriculum. And then in the last week of our work, we did a whole big change and went on to do a very notable piece of work noticed by the president later on even. But to build the trust, to build the confidence, to build the relationship, that's what it's, for me, what it's all about. It isn't that I have to agree with them. It isn't that I'll do it the way they do it, but we have to build understanding. And I think that one of the recent World Affairs Council Upstate advisory board meetings, one of the members said, the reason I like this organization is because I get to hear other views. And I thought to myself, that's what it's all about. It's that we need to take these kind of opportunities to let other people know what we are thinking about, and then listen to others about what are they thinking about. And that, I think, goes back to your point, Kyle, locally here as well as there, wherever here or there is. Yeah. We need to do that in a more universal way, kind of thing.
I think Rob might have a question from the audience for us. Rob?
Yes, the question I have is about globalism versus nationalism, which seems to be the response in this country is globalism has become almost a curse word at times. So I wanted to ask you guys what you think about that, which is going back the other direction.
Yeah, David, I'll take a swipe at this first, just from my educational perspective, so everyone understand that. We use the words globalization and internationalization differently. Globalization tends to be the active process, right, of making economic systems, political systems sort of global, right, tying those in. Whereas internationalization is the recognition that all things are interconnected and then preparing us to work within that system. So globalization really is sort of the active creation of that for whatever political or economic purpose you want, right? So that's like taking your manufacturing over somewhere else. That's globalization. Whereas internationalization, as we understand it, let's say at a university where we're trying to internationalize our curriculum or prepare our students for an international workplace, it's a recognition that we're all interconnected, whether that be politically, economically, or emotionally, health-wise. We've seen it with COVID, right? And then being prepared to work within that system. So, and that's not exactly the answer to your question, because I think what's happening is we're talking more about what's happening politically in a number of countries, not all of them, but the US included, with this back and forth between those who think globally and those who think more nationally. That's a very old, I would say, pro et contra and back and forth in America even. From looking inward to looking outward, that goes back to the early 20th century and even before. But that's at least what I want. I want to create that distinction between actively trying to make things interconnected as opposed to understanding that we're interconnected. David?
I think that at times globalization has also meant to some people this idea of a melting pot, that somehow we're all going to become the same kind of thing. And I think there's been real reactions against that as well as a part of that stopping of globalization. And I really believe the differences that we have in the world makes it far more interesting and fun and rich and part of what makes it go. I mean, I'm a big believer in the dialectics, and that is the pros and cons, the yin and the yang, the opposing forces make the world go on. If they get too strong, of course, then they fly apart. But for the most part, our differences make it what it is that makes this engine go. And I think that, you know, efforts to say, oh, we all need to be alike. And yet, when I've been, like when I was in Guyana, the man who took 4 days to come from the very southern part of Guyana by river, by walking, by bus, by taxi, in fact, there at the end. And he brought his cell phone with him and put the chip in and went on the cell phone. But he lives in an area that he cannot even use a cell phone. But when he comes to the big city, now that man could probably come to a city in the US and just put his chip in and been just as similarly connected. Those kind of connections, those kind of technology is going to be there whether we put it there or they grab it and take it. And I think it's both ways. It's going to be there. And people say, oh, you're going over there to change them. No, 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 no. They're coming here and they're changing themselves. And they're watching MTV and you know, eating McDonald's and whatever. And they are making changes as well as we are. And so it isn't a one-way street. It really is very much two ways on these issues and things.
So David, when we had our talk on January 5th before the January 6th event, we identified 3 themes that we thought would be really interesting to our audience to look at what other countries think about and how the US is dealing with them. And they happen to be COVID or impacts of COVID, global leadership, and then climate change or climate issues, right?
Right.
And so I thought we might talk a little bit about that, and then in about 15, 17 minutes, if we've got some time, we'll open up the floor to some questions. So let's begin with COVID. What are you hearing, David?
One of the most proud things I think the world should have right now is around the fact that within basically 1 year, we have developed multiple vaccines against this virus. And from all the kinds of things that I can read and see, we did it pretty collaboratively. Yes, it's competitive. Yes, people are going to make money on it, on all of that. Now, that's not talking about distribution or supply chains and all of that, but the fact that the world worked on this issue worldwide, I think is a very, very amazing. And part of it's amazing because we do have the technology and we did take advantage of it to work on these kinds of issues together. So, but the impacts of COVID, I mean, on work behaviors, on education behaviors, I mean, just amazing. One of the things I heard while I was trying to do some research with friends is that the US in many ways on the STEM side has gone quiet for education because we're so inwardly focused on what are we doing with education right here now kind of thing. And that India has really stepped forward with Zoom kind of online education in STEM. And that at least in Ghana, they're seeing a real impact in private schools of the utilization of things from India. And evidently there's a real tension there between the whole China road, what do we call it, Silk Road kind of extensions into Africa in very strong ways. And India is making similar kind of inroads and things. As at the same time, people have noticed that the US has been pulling back, been looking more inwardly focused, and that in those vacuums, other countries are stepping in and stepping forward. So COVID in and of itself, because of what it is and how the world is dealing with it, things are changing very, very much due to COVID, for sure, and very fast.
Yeah, one of the things, and I'm going to put my little caveat on this again, is you know, as a Chinese literary scholar and someone who keeps tabs on this, these are not my opinions. These are things that I read in the newspapers coming out of China. But I wanted to share some things that are being said, and you've identified the really, I think, the really good things we've done with what was it called, the WARP, right? Is that what it was called?
Yeah.
Our WARP initiative here in the U.S. We've been very successful. I think every economist and physician thinks that was a miracle almost of what we did. But there's been some weaknesses too. The rollout, right? The bureaucratic rollout has been quite fraught. And what I've been noticing in the Chinese newspapers are a couple of things that I want us all to think about, because that's how they're thinking about us, and that's what their people are consuming in their media. And that is that the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine, all these are really successful, and they're driving our markets up as well, and they're first to market in both the UK, Europe, and the United States. These vaccines, they're being talked about as first world vaccines because they take a great deal of technology, special transportation and storage. So when it comes into a discussion of international relations, what the Chinese are saying is, they're putting all this money behind vaccines that can't be used in developing countries of the third world because they don't have the infrastructure or medical facilities or training to use them. So once again, we have, America or the UK just serving their developed, wealthy societies and forgetting about Africa, forgetting about Southeast Asia, who can't take advantage of the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccines that can't be kept at let's say, a regular refrigeration temperature. So that's in the political jabs, right, between ideologies. It's they don't care about the world. They don't care about the world. They just care about the wealthy part of the world. And then the other one has been sort of the rollout of this, where we haven't been as quite as efficient. And this plays into, I would say, a perennial criticism we always hear from China of the US, is that democracy may sound good, but it's clunky. It's clunky, it's inefficient, it's contentious. And so, the American system has basically, they're pointing out the fact that in the face of a public crisis, our rollout isn't quite as efficient. And so these are a couple of the things that we're hearing from different parts of the world, China in particular here.
One of the things that we use in Design Thinkers group is, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. And if you want to do a lot, it takes cooperation, collaboration, and doing things together, for sure. And, definitely, if you want to, do it. Yeah, it's kind of thing.
Well,
I think, go ahead.
Let's look at global leadership, because it looks like we got about 10 minutes left, and this is where I think we might hit January 6th a little bit more directly. So David, what are we hearing from the rest of the world about America's status as a shining beacon on a hill and being global leaders?
Some of the people that I surveyed, really were very clear that if you don't know America very well, you probably were very surprised by what just happened. If you know America quite well, you know that a lot of this has been boiling underneath at a low level for quite a while. That there have been people that distrust the government more and more. They distrust each other. And so we've seen a deterioration of that national trust and ability to respond to things. So that you've seen this coming. It's been a part of it. I don't think there were very many people that saw it boiling to the point that we saw on the 6th, but it was there. And that yet many people that I've communicated with said, yes, given all that, the US still has this role and the ability to take a position of moral leadership. And it's been damaged, it's been hurt. And in some people's opinion, it'll take years to recover. In other people's opinion, it was like, it's been damaged, it's been hurt, because now you're just one of us. Mm-hmm. Now we're seeing you as a co-equal more than we did before. and that you're not this exceptional place, but you're a place that has problems too. And you need to be part of the world community that just is a part of the community, not a world leader, but a part of who the world is. So I've seen and gotten communications on that kind of change that some people are beginning to see.
Yeah. Again, because I'm reading a lot of the Chinese news, what I'm going to say is negative, but I do want us to think about it. It's given folks an opportunity to point at our contradictions, right, David? So, when we criticize other people's electoral processes, when we criticize violence in others' countries, we do so from a quite elevated moral standpoint. But when that happens at home, well, then we got the gotcha, right? We got the gotcha finger thrown at us. And one thing in particular that I saw coming from China was, for a long time, decades, we've been hopeful, since Kissinger and Nixon, we've been hopeful that the opening up of the economy, and in some ways their political system interacting with the rest of the world, taking on responsibilities with global climate change, et cetera, would move to a liberalization of the democratic process. And but the fact of the matter is, they've always been really afraid of giving their people that kind of freedom, because they were afraid, because of their history, hundreds of years of history, they're afraid that stuff like this will happen, right? The riots will happen, that they'll lose control. And it's been a fear. You all might watch Jackie Chan movies. Jackie Chan will tell you this. He's like, no, we don't want democracy in China because then we're gonna have riots everywhere. We don't want to be like. So, one of the contradictions it points to that I've seen, and it's just it's churning, right? Even if you go to the newspapers now, Chinese newspapers now, you see them talking about it, is in 2019, when the Hong Kong protesters got out of control, they rioted and took over their state legislature in Hong Kong. And from America, a lot of our leaders looked at that and called those people heroes. And the parallels between what the Hong Kongers did against China and the state legislature and what they did let's say the supporters taking over Congress did are very similar. They defaced the property, they defaced the flag and put up an older flag. We've seen pictures of the Confederate flag in Congress. Very, very similar, right? And so the Hong Kong protesters put up a colonial British flag, right, as opposed to the Chinese one. And we called them heroes. And so what China is doing now, they listened into Joe Biden's talk, where he basically said, hey, these people are extremists. He used that exact word. This was a riot and it was assault. And those three terms are the way that China talks about their own Hong Kong protesters. So you see the contradiction here. We're telling someone that their protesters or rioters are heroes, right? But we won't say that about our own. So it exposes a little bit of a contradiction, or some people might say hypocrisy, but it just becomes an opportunity for people we've had a hard time working with to say, hey, see, you treat your people differently than you do ours.
But I also think, Kyle, that it's part of the way that we communicate who we are, what we are, and how we treat them. This, right now we're facing this whole concern of many people about stopping free speech and being concerned with who's controlling that and how that's being managed. I really think that needs to be explored, discussed, and debated. I think there's pros and cons on all sides of that, and it should be a very national issue to be discussed, because this kind of stopping people from communicating and being, one of the questions that's been asked in the chat was, why should some people care? Or does the rest of the world see it that way? And do they now think less of the US in total about the mistrust? And no, that was the one I was going for was, and what do you say to the latter group, which is those that do not share this concern? And that's about the leadership piece that I think we were going to talk a bit about. It isn't that you want to be, in my view, that the US has to be a world leader, but the world, needs the US and the US needs the world just as a partner or a part of it. On, on Thursday this week, last week, the Straits Times in Singapore did this wonderful article on masks and rubber gloves and showing the dramatic growth of the use of masks and rubber gloves and what that's going to do to the environment. The environment, I think, is one of those issues that's impacting every individual in the world, and that if we don't begin to join together to address this issue, whether it's through formal or informal, personal and local, we need to address this environmental issue because it's impacting all of us in very negative ways. And how we're dealing with disposable items and how we're dealing with air pollution, which we found, can really be impacted in a positive way by not traveling in many locations. We have been able to see that we can do some things about these things, and we need to do them. So being a part of the world and working with the world, maybe not in a leadership position, but in a collaborative position, in a way of cooperating with others, in being a part of the world. Just because you're not the leader doesn't mean you can't be a very good supporter and member and participant. You can be a part of the world piece. So I would say we need to stay involved. We need to stay connected. And one of the things I wrote down was change will happen and change will continue to happen. We have to continually stay informed, aware, and involved, or the world will go on without us as an individuals or as a country. So in my belief, we need to stay involved, we need to stay connected and learn from each other and share.
Yeah. When I think about, how we can still, or what we can do moving forward, to claim some exceptionality, right? I really do think this is a moment for us to double down on our intercultural communication, our old image as a melting pot where we can all be different, the e pluribus unum, right? We're different, but we get along and things work, right? Maybe not as efficiently as in other systems where freedoms can be trampled on to shoehorn things through. But I really do think, in a recent piece I wrote, I said the biggest global challenge, I think, is intercultural communication right now. No matter how well you do with your technology, vaccine, et cetera, if we're not getting along, right, we're going to use all these things as weapons against each other. So I really think this is an opportunity for the United States to double down and say, okay, let's figure out how to communicate respectively, actively listen to each other, extend humanity and empathy to each other. And we've occupied that space, I think, at different times in the past. And we just happen to be, it's a little bit of a wave, right? It's a wave in every country. And I think we need to double down on it again. And that could be the way in which we become a leader. And I hope we do. That's something I hope we prioritize. I know in education, it is something we are, and this is probably where my viewpoint's coming from, it is something we are prioritizing at Clemson in particular, but in higher ed, it really is a focus. Let's be better communicators so everyone in our community feels not just tolerated, right? But they're involved and they have free, open, and equal access to all sorts of fora. So that's what I hope we're a leader in. I hope we're a leader in intercultural communication going forward, David.
I think, Kyle, you've just edged up on Black Lives Matter and that whole big movement and how that is being treated, how it is very much connected to that kind of attitude of being a part of a community, being inclusive, being connected, and not somehow different and things. And that is a major issue facing America. And I think it's a big part of who we are and our history. And I think that we need to really begin working together on that issue. And well, we've made major progress over the years, for sure. but there's a lot of work yet to be done. And that is very much in other countries as well, have really looked at that issue and prided and brought that up as an issue that they are facing in their own countries, and that they are interested in how we deal with it, and we should be interested in how they deal with it, kind of thing. One of the things
right, that's a global issue, the interethnic
really
conflict. It's really bad in places, and folks look to us to see how to manage it, because that's what our country was built upon, that idea of us coming together, knowing our differences.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we've got a few minutes. Do you want to open it up, David? Any last words you want to say, or do we want to open it up to Rob?
Open.
Yeah, I was going to say I have a few questions, if you would like. One from Mark Bullock, which basically he talks about how we're seen in the world through Hollywood and in our movies and the media, and we tend to air our problems in the movies. So it's not always just one view of us; it's the overall thing. And he says this as someone who has traveled a lot. So your thoughts on that?
How entertainment sets us up to influence other people's views of us? Yes, that happens quite a bit. I would say for me, that's been manifested in, I would say when people bring it up when I've lived abroad, particularly in Asia, it's been a negative portrayal of an immoral, decadent American society. So that's where I've seen it manifested, sort of person to person, right? I don't have any Gallup polls or anything for that, but when that comes up, it's usually folks talking about a decadent moral society.
One of the things that the Russians used to say was that you brought us McDonald's, MTV, and M&Ms. And MTV could be, as Mark Bullock's saying, the movies kind of thing. And we do. We're very good at that. Our music, our movies, our ability to use technology and create it is just, it's incredible. We are very, very good at those things. And, we need to teach others as well.
I have another one for you. If a comment from
Rob, before you move forward, do you mind if I just step in real quick?
No.
Yeah, because I just saw that the person asking the question said, "Oh yeah, but what about this aspect of it?" So I'm going to answer it real quick. Yeah, Mark, this actually, Mark said, well, how is this a part of self-critique? And I think this is good. I talk about this with my father all the time, like I said, who worked for the government. Yeah, one of the things is people maybe take it for granted that what's being portrayed in our entertainment is a direct reflection of reality, when in fact, a lot of the times it's us trying to process a critique, right, of our own society. So we're not saying, hey, right, this is what America's like, take it or leave it. It's more of, a lot of times we use entertainment, music, movies, etc., to think about, to play out scenarios. It's a form of self-critique, us looking back at ourselves. It's not saying this is what Baltimore really is like. It's like, well, this is a problem we have. This is how it gets played out. And so we're sort of doing that self-critiquing, airing our dirty laundry out in front of the world, which we feel like is good. It helps us progress, to air our dirty laundry to ourselves. It's part of our freedom of the press, freedom of speech. But then what it does is, when people just see it as a reflection of reality, they might get a skewed view. So.
All right. So here, Alex asks, he says, we seem to be concerned in this thing about how the world sees us, but many of them do not care. How do we answer that? How do we answer why being global, why us being introspective matters?
I think that it matters because we need to be a part of the community. We are a part of the world, and we need to be a player in there. And I don't mean just a leader. I mean a participant. We are citizens of the world as well, and we're citizens of our own country as well. by being a part of the world is because sharing information, sharing knowledge, sharing challenges such as environmental things or health things, as we've done more recently, we are there. And I think that we're going to be worse off if we don't participate and are somehow left out. I think that we need to share what we know and gain from others from what they know.
And I think we don't realize, because we don't have the time, right? We don't realize just how global everything we enjoy already is. And I'll just give you an example. I did a study and taught students about this phenomenon for a while. In America, we like to eat our shrimp. Do you know where it comes from, and you know who produces it? And it turns out for decades it was produced by slave labor. And I'm talking recently. And so a lot of the times we don't understand that trying not to be engaged in global conversations means that down the line, as you follow trade routes and processes, there's all sorts of things happening. No one wants slave labor producing their shrimp, but that's actually what was happening. And it wasn't until we joined those conversations, put pressure on the Thai government to police that a little bit better, that they stopped slaving lots of different ethnic groups to produce that, to produce those shrimp. And now you'll see that Walmart is importing their shrimp from India and these other places. So I think a lot of times we just don't understand that the things we're enjoying, whether it be our car or our food or whatever, they're already global. And so if we look into that and realize that we're a part of that conversation as a human species, right, there are effects all over the place.
Yeah,
I will say, just to add, David, you have something. I was going to say, well, some small villages in Afghanistan took down some major buildings, and so what happens in these countries does make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And there is one more question that from two people. They asked us, this is, in their mind, this is a small group of people who are creating this dissent in this country. Does the world see it that way, and how do they feel about that? You know, the fermenting, as they say, from a small group of the white supremacists and whatever. And I'm not clear if that's entirely true, but I ask you to respond to that.
One of the most remarkable things I think that happened in November was the number of people on all sides who voted this last year. That to me was an incredible piece of whoever you voted for. And, you know, it wasn't a overwhelming majority one way or the other. It really was very, very close to being split. And I think that really, for me, said a lot about where America is. And more recent events is probably fostered, encouraged by some smaller group kind of thing. But there is quite a big issues between the two different sides. And I think there's multiple sides to these things. And somebody in the chat I noticed was asking, where do people get their news from? Just like in the US. We used to have 3 major channels of news, or maybe 4, and now there's 400 or 4,000. People can get their news from all kinds of different sources. I mean, I personally, on a daily basis, listen to the BBC out of UK, not America, but out of the UK. I listen to Brighton. I listen to radio from Panama, in Panama City, and I also do Radio Netherlands. And those are 3 that I listen to every day. So, I mean, the choices are unlimited of where I can go to get my information and things. So that's true for people in very rural areas across the world. If they have access, and I've been in places where it's been a windmill and solar panels that are getting the electricity to have connectivity to the world. I've communicated, sent emails, exchanged text messages when I get connectivity. And those can happen in very, very remote places. You don't need to be on the grid to get electricity. You need solar panels, and you need some kind of power generation. to be able to power up, and you're on. So where do people get their information? If you're doing kind of informational campaigns such as public health education, or if you're doing some kind of marketing, if you're in private sector, you really, really have to look at those specific target clients or target audiences and find out where they're getting their information, because it can change from village to village. It can change from parts of villages to other parts of villages, as to where they're listening and who they're talking to and who they're communicating with, kinds of things, for sure. It's not all one or any simple way of doing that.
David, you do point out something that's a good habit of information hygiene that I want the group to hear about. It's not just about spreading, let's say, your listening or reading habits between, let's say, a couple of US sources, right, that might be on different ends of the spectrum. But if you go to BBC or France 24, other English, or Spiegel, right, in Germany, this is a good way of triangulating more and more. It's called horizontal reading. It's a really good habit of what we call information hygiene, which I think moderates us more and helps us speak to each other more instead of sort of yelling at each other from polarized.
Yeah, I'm a big believer of there is no one truth. There is truth, definitely. But the way that I, as a human being, can try to figure that out is I try to do triangulation, and that is to listen to it from different points of view to figure out where that is out there someplace in the middle, because it's usually out there in some kind of amorphous, meaning it's not contained, it's flexible and changing all the time as to what is the truth. It's there because we all have different points of view. We have different perspectives, different backgrounds, different whatevers, kind of things. So that triangulation, I really, the old forestry idea of figuring out where the fire is, they never get it exact. They get it close. And that's what I try to do with truth, is when you're trying to figure out who's telling the truth in this kind of situation. It's always an interesting triangulation piece, I think.
Tracy and Rob, we're bumping up against time. We could talk forever. I know David and I could just keep going on and on. I do think I have some meetings this afternoon, but
well, we do have some questions, and
sure.
that I was gonna just say, let's go to the Q&A and let people ask the questions themselves, and I'm gonna ask them to not make it be a speech, and keep it as to one question at a time, and just raise your hand, and then we will let you, we'll unmic you so you can say it. So let's go to that and see how that goes. And we have a few minutes if you guys are good. We can go another 15 minutes or so, or 20 minutes, up to you all. Okay?
Sure, look forward to hearing.
So anybody, I don't know if we can raise it. You have to show us that you're there by putting your video on for a minute, and just raise your hand, and then we'll do that. And while we're waiting, I'm going to just say one thing. Visiting a remote village in Nepal, one of the people said to me, I think I'd been the first person there in 25 years who wasn't Nepali. And they said, do you know this person from Pittsburgh? And I went like, what's this about? I said, well, they were a Peace Corps volunteer that had come to their village, and it left such a deep impression on them. And of course, they not understanding, that U.S. is how big it is, but I've heard that when I mention that to people, they've heard that all over. So I want to say a shout out to the Peace Corps and people who do work like that. But okay, Klaus, you have a question?
Hi, Klaus.
Oh, okay. Anybody, do we have any? I'm looking for.
Can't hear you.
Well, I do have another question. Have you ever wanted to say to people that you were Canadian while you were traveling abroad?
When the gun was held against my body, and it was a loaded gun and a military guy in coup times, I did not want to be the American that he was looking for, but I was. So yeah, there's been times that can happen. I mean, I had to own up who I was and what I was doing there and how it was. And it was a interesting time because the shipment of flour on the ship was not going to be offloaded until the Ghanaian government, the new Ghanaian government, paid for the demurrer charges that we're holding from the U.S. And the government was saying it's been paid, and the ship's office was with the bank, and they were saying no, it hadn't been received, and it was actually held by the embassy in Washington for 4 extra days. And I was being asked by this military guy why we couldn't unload the ship. And I was like, I have nothing to do with this. That's not my job. So yes, I did not want to be an American at that moment. Tracy?
Well, I think I haven't seen a lot more questions, but I think this has been fascinating. So let me just share with you that we have some really exciting things coming up. And we want to thank David and Kyle for your sharing. It was fantastic. I really enjoyed this a lot. And having been one of those people like Mark Bolick and a few others I noticed who have traveled a lot, it's really was well done. You covered everything. Our next event coming up in our America in the World series is on February 11th at 12 o'clock. It's called A Global Cry for Racial Justice. And we're going to have 2 options because we're hoping at this point to do it both live and as at the Kroc Center and do a Zoom. So we'll have both happening. So hopefully you could do that. For more information, of course, go to our website, upstateinternational.org, or World Affairs Council Upstate.org, either one, and sign up for that, register, and we'll have lunch at that event. There will be a charge, so when you do that, but it's going to be a box lunch. We're going to make it very safe. We're working on making it, it's a big building, and we'll spread everyone out. So we're conscious of that. So I say, if you would like to and feel comfortable, please join us for that. And if you're interested in seeing this again, or someone you know might want to watch it, we do record these things, and they're on. You can go onto our website and find the link to the YouTube channel where we have all the ones we've done so far on there, and some have been fantastic. So at this point, I think thank you so much for attending, and I look forward to seeing you all again next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.